Kashmir was a land in transition, crossroads of faiths and philosophies. Its valleys echoed with the chants of the early philosophers, the verses of wandering poets, and the prayers of newly arrived Sufi saints. From the early 14th century, Mongol incursions and internal turmoil fractured the old order, giving way to a new power, a fledgling sultanate established by Shah Mir in the 14th century. It was a period of complexity, a time when Persianate courtly culture met Kashmiri folk traditions, when ascetics and scholars walked the same streets. By the late 14th century, however, the air had grown heavy. Sultan Sikandar Shah Miri's reign brought both a surge in religious reform and the shadow of sectarian strife. Temples fell, a colossal Buddha was destroyed, and anxiety gripped the communities of the valley. And yet, even in these turbulent times, the historians would later remark that Islam in Kashmir was as tolerant and eclectic as the Hinduism of Kashmir. In this world, several paths to the divine competed and converged. The Kubrawiya Sufis, led by Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani, insisted on strict adherence to law. The Surawardiya Sufis, arriving from Central Asia, offered another Persianate flow of mysticism. Meanwhile, the yogis and the earlier philosophers preserved a much older spiritual memory, whispering of liberation through self-realization. But somewhere between these towering traditions, something new began to grow. Around the dawn of the 15th century, a quiet revolution took root, not in palaces or mosques, but in caves. Fields and humble village gatherings were also where this very order was formed. It was a path that spoke the Kashmiri tongue, that drew wisdom from Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic wells alike, and that belonged not to kings or clerks, but to the common people. A scholar would later write that this movement approached Islam from the standpoint of local and non-elite concerns. Its leaders were not jurists but wanderers. One scholar even observed that the basic model of Islamic life in early Kashmir wasn't the rigid cleric, it was a traveling dervish. And yet the order, grounded in simplicity, slowly began to transform the moral and spiritual fabric of the valley. Its voice rose against excess and sectarianism. It embraced the peasants, the low-born, and the forgotten people, and though it began as a whisper, its echo would shape Kashmir for centuries to come. Who was behind this quiet transformation? Who dared to forge a unique Kashmiri way to God, a way of ascetics and poets, farmers and saints? Known by names like Alamdar-e-Kashmir, which means the flag bearer of Kashmir, or Sheikhul Alam, the spiritual guide of the world. His name was Sheikh Noor Din Noorani, known to the whole world as Nund Rishi. Sheikh Noor Noorani, known to the world as Nund Rishi or Sheikhul Alam, was born in 1377 in Kaimu, a village in South Kashmir. His parents, Salar Sons, and his wife, Sadr Moj, were recent converts from Hinduism. According to tradition, his original name was Nuruddin, which means the light of faith. It was given to him by Mir Muhammad Hamdani, who was the son of Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani. As an ascetic from youth, Nund Rishi earned the reverence of all communities. Pandit Anand Kaul, writing in 1929, later called him a hermit of the highest order, noting that even centuries later, his name is held in profound respect and veneration by both Muslims and Hindus throughout Kashmir. In his early 30s, Nund Rishi withdrew from secular life into the forests for deep meditation. For around 12 years, he lived as a recluse. Sources say after 12 years, he re-emerged in roughly 1420 to find the Rishi Sufi order during Kashmir's crisis of identity. Over the next 2 decades, he traveled widely in the valley's rural regions, establishing places of prayer and teaching. According to historians, he set up hermitages at Dobigam, Devsar, Birwa, and Rupwan, covering much of south and central Kashmir. His core message was conveyed in Kashmiri language poems called Shruks. Nund Rishi's personal life was marked by extreme simplicity and devotion. He owned no land and kept no personal wealth. He wore simple woolen garments and often ate only wild herbs. Chronicles stress that he abstained from eating meat and subsided on wild vegetables, like a Hindu yogi. Historians note that the Rishis ordained vegetarianism and celibacy for their members. He rejected pomp and title. Even kings were said to pay him respect, though he never sought court favor. In 1438, Nund Rishi died and was buried in Sharif, where oral traditions believe over 900,000 people showed up on the first 2 days of his funeral. His status as a saint was cemented in the following centuries. As one observer wrote, Nund Rishi's aphoristic couplets became so ingrained in Kashmiri life that people repeat such aphoristic lines again and again in daily life as current coins of quotation. He is thus revered not only as a religious leader, but as a cultural symbol of Kashmir's blended heritage. Nund Rishi's teachings were carried forward by devoted disciples. Many drawn from local yogis and pandits, his principal disciples included Baba Bahmuddin, Baba Zainuddin, Baba Latifuddin, and Baba Nasruddin, all noted as recent converts to Islam, who then helped spread the Rishi order throughout the villages. These men traveled the countryside, founded Rishi places of preaching. Their teachers' message of unity and service were taught in these places. In later centuries, other saints like Sheikh Hamza Makhdoom and people like Shams Fakir would acknowledge Nund Rishi's influence, but the first generation set the pattern. Remarkably for medieval times, Nund Rishi also admitted women into the Rishi order. Among his known female disciples were Behat Bibi, Dehat Bibi, Shamdad, and Shanga Bibi. These women became spiritual guides in their own right, composing verses and instructing villagers. Local lore even credits them with weaving together Kashmiri folk and Islamic themes in devotional verses. Historians emphasize that Nund Rishi drew on Hindu and Buddhist religious culture in his Shruks and admitted women into the Rishi order. Unheard of steps that broadened his appeal was his admission of women into the order. Through his male and female disciples, Nund Rishi's teaching spread deeply into rural Kashmir. In fact, Rishi places of worship in outlying areas came to far outnumber those of competing orders in cities, reflecting how thoroughly his message took root in the countryside. The Rishi order's ethics combined Islamic monotheism with Kashmiri folk ethics. Nund Rishi emphasized Tawheed, the oneness of God, and heartfelt devotion over empty ritual. He preached that Islam must translate into ethical living. His verses spoke directly in Kashmiri, making Quranic and Sufi ideas accessible to peasants. As one scholar notes, Nund Rishi Shruks preached love, equality, non-violence, tolerance, and respect for all beliefs, all in the Kashmiri vernacular articulation of Sufi spirituality. The key elements of Rishi teachings included simplicity and humility. The Rishis upheld an austere lifestyle. Nund Rishi taught that true dignity comes from humility. One of his memorable couplets says in translation, "That person will attain heaven who shares his food with others. He who abandons anger, greed, self-love and pride, he alone is Muslim." Here generosity and modesty, not social status or lineage, define a good believer. A Muslim for Nund Rishi was someone who practices what he preaches, shares his food, turns his back on anger, greed and pride. Thus service to fellow humans is portrayed as devotion to God. The Rishis were vegetarians and emphasized non-violence. Influenced by Kashmiri yogic traditions, mostly by the great yogini Lala Dutt, the Rishis forbade meat eating and any killing. Scholars explicitly note that Nund Rishi's order ordained vegetarianism and celibacy. This stood out even more to Orthodox Muslims of the period. Nund Rishi's teachings include an early environmental ethic. One of his verse quotations became a folk proverb. Unposhtele, Yelvan Posh, which translates to food shall last as long as the forests last. This expresses the idea that human well-being depends on preserving nature. In practice, Rishi disciples worked the land and shared its bounty with others. Non-harm or said ahimsa was thus integrated into their spirituality. Nund Rishi and the Rishis used to plant fruit trees in all places they went to not eat from them, but for others to eat from them. Other things in Rishi orders include equality and anti-caste ethics. Islam's vision of human equality was central. Nund Rishi repeatedly denounced caste and aristocratic privilege. He reminded Kashmiris that social divisions are meaningless before God. One of his verses explicitly stated that in the afterlife, caste will be extinct. Scholars record that questions of caste and class were the ones that most troubled Nund Rishi, and he considered hunger the most degrading of adversities. His community was deliberately open to low-caste converts and even non-Muslims, reflecting a radical view or a radical egalitarian impulse. Another characteristic of the Rishis was devotion over ritual. The Rishis did not reject Islamic ritual. They prayed, fasted and did everything necessary, but taught that external forms are meaningless without inner faith and good deeds. Nund Rishi often invoked God by names familiar from the Quran, for instance, Rabb or by Allah, but urged that love for God be expressed through community action. For example, one Shruk says that the ideal believer fasts on holy days, bends low in prayer, as part of the list of virtuous acts. He thus combined traditional observance with social ethics. His order was cautious to maintain Tawheed. He never thought that God has form, but his verses often describe the divine as present everywhere in nature. In effect, Nund Rishi's Islam was a tasawwuf or Sufi mysticism rooted in Kashmiri context, a shahaja or pure natural faith of the people. They also preached love, tolerance and service. Consistent with Kashmiri culture of the time, Nund Rishi championed universal love. He spoke of God's mercy and taught compassion for neighbors of all faiths. His shruks include many proverbs urging kindness to friends, enemies, and even animals. As one commentator observes, the content of his poetry consistently stresses oneness and social justice, denouncing hypocrisy and communalism. In daily life, Rishis ran langars or community kitchens and helped the needy, viewing such service as worship. Their gatherings were open to Hindus as well, and even strict rituals were relaxed. They abandoned ritual slaughter and insisted offering halal or vegetarian feasts. In short, the Rishi path taught an Islam of the heart, one God, one community, bound by love, simplicity, and justice. Nund Rishi's spiritual teachings were crystallized in short Kashmiri quotations called Shruks. These verses of economic carry deep ethics. For example, one couplet became an environmental proverb. Unposhtele, Yelvan Posh. Food shall last as long as forests last. This short line urges preservation of nature. Our sustenance depends on the health of the forests. It shows how his teachings spoke to everyday concerns. Sheikh Noor emphasized on the consequences of giving in to the self. He says, quote, Nafsan kudnas eti, nafse kurnas pasheman, nafus chui madhosh hankal city, nafas yimrut suot lamakan. The nafs led me astray, the nafs brought me shame in every place. The nafs is intoxicated, it will shatter your resolve. Whoever follows the nafs becomes a stranger to himself. Nund Rishi warns that surrendering to one's lower self leads to misguidance, shame and weakness. When the self takes control, a person loses his true identity and becomes estranged from his own essence. Another example emphasizes generosity and humility. Nund Rishi says, quote, That person will attain heaven who shares his food with others. He who abandons anger, greed, self-love and pride, he alone is Muslim. Here are the ideal believers defined by sharing meals and giving up vice, not by rituals. Such lines were often quoted by villagers in lieu of formal sermons. Many more shruks treat divine love, death and non-attachment. Example, his negative theology of die before you die, a famous saying from the Rishi lore, but they are always integrated with social wisdom. In all cases, Nund Rishi's Kashmiri phrasing made the message accessible to illiterate masses. As one scholar notes, like Laleshwari or Laladed, all his mystic verses were in common man's language, full of folk images, proverbs, and parables. Nund Rishi's impact on Kashmir's culture and religion has been immense. His teachings became embedded in the region's identity. His tomb was built by Sultan Zain al-Abidin in 1460 at Trar Sharif. Both Hindus and Muslims regard him with reverence. Over the centuries, Nund Rishi's Shruks circulated orally and in manuscripts. As Amir Bazaz notes, his name and sayings have reminded current coins of quotation. In everyday speech, his legacy inspired later mystics. The 16th century Surawardi saint Sheikh Hamza Maktoum and the 19th century Qadri Sufi Shams Fakir belonged to the same syncretic tradition and honored Nund Rishi. Today, the Rishi tradition survives strongly in rural Kashmir. Rishi places of worship dot the countryside far more densely than urban mosques, and villagers still sing his verses as community gatherings. Sheikh Noor reflected the same emphasis on unity and simplicity he taught. Nund Rishi's motto of peace, equality, and ecological balance resonates strongly amid 21st century challenges in Kashmir. In summarizing his significance, scholars say that the Rishi movement laid the foundations of a new Kashmiri political spirituality grounded in the Kashmiri's language life world. Even 6 centuries later, Sheikh Nooruddin's insistence on love and social justice endures in Kashmiri culture and religious life, affirming his vision of Islam in a distinctly Kashmiri form. I would like to thank Professor Abir Bazaz, Professor Shafi Shok, and Professor Ghulam Muhammad Shad for their great works on Nund Rishi, which helped in making this video possible. I will link all of these works below in the description. Please check it out if you like to know more about this great saint and to know about Kashmir in the medieval times. I'll see you